sign the developer contract. This is actually, this project right here that you're going to see on the preliminary plat. So you guys actually haven't approved the preliminary plat yet, but the developer turned in the preliminary plat for a small subdivision in Junction City, but he also turned in his letter of credit at the same time. So we have the developer's letter of credit. It's $150,000 for that road, that short little street, water, sewer, and street lights, et cetera. So again, the letter of credit came in from the bank. We got that on 3/8 when the preliminary plat came in. So you guys formally have to accept that letter of credit into our system and authorize the chairman to sign the developer contract, but you still have to approve, assuming you will approve, the preliminary plat that's down here under the subdivision plats. So you could wait and approve that after you give it the plat approval, but since the letter of credit is actually in our office and we've already got the letter of credit for the project and the construction plans, the process here would be to accept that LOC and give the chairman authority to sign the contract. We can make that contingent on approval of the preliminary plat. And I'll talk about that a little more when we get to the plat item about the project.
Chair, I move that we approve the letter of credit contingent on the approval of the preliminary plan.
Motion, Commissioner Ruby. Second for Commissioner Collier. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
And just to finish that up on the construction sureties, again, your summary chart, though, with those two additions now brings us with cash letters of credit, or cash bonds and letter of credit. We have approximately $805,000 in projects that we are currently holding bonds on. And that's reflected on your chart there, split out between cash and letter of credit.
All right, next item on the agenda, subdivision approval. We have a table item.
Need a motion to take it off the table for Mark and Janelle Farrell and Chris and Heather Stewart. Do I have to read should I read that thing again?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. They have applied for the approval of a subdivision on a tract of land containing 16.587 acres located at 6210 and 6252 Perryville Road in Danville. The property is zoned ag. Basically, it's just neighbors swapping parcels. And we had to table it last time because we had not received our application or fee.
We have a motion. Bring it off the table.
Yes.
Motion, Commissioner Davenport. That was second from Commissioner Boyd. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. So, we just brought it off the table, I haven't voted on it.
That's right.
We still need to vote on it, right? Okay.
Yeah, I vote on these individually since we have to do that other plat separate.
Pardon?
They still need to vote on it.
Oh, okay.
We'll do this one individually.
Yeah.
Now, to recap again, this one has, all the paperwork's cleared on the paperwork, so,
It's all been received.
and I think during the review that we typically do on the tech meeting, there wasn't anything else that I recall on this topic.
It's been corrected and signed and
Yeah,
it's ready
this is
for the
all
commissioner's
clean.
signature.
So I make a motion that we approve this plat.
Second. So we have a motion from Commissioner Collier, a second from Commissioner Ruby. All in favor of the motion to approve? Motion passes.
Second, we have Rihanna and Mike Lynch have applied for the subdivision of a 1.15 acre tract from the land at 626 Waterworks Road in Boyle County. The division of this lot number 1, with its 422 plus square foot of road frontage, is from the parent tract of Lynch and leaves approximately 56 acres therein, with over 32,000 square foot of road frontage remaining. The property is zoned ag. Vantage is the surveyor. Utility signatures have been obtained. The plat's ready for final approval and chair signature.
Commissioner Boyd, we have a motion. Second. Commissioner Griffin, second the motion. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Okay.
Number three, and it's up on the screen, should be in your packet, that's the preliminary subdivision, or what we call major plat for Kelly and Ann Griffith, and this is in Junction City, and that road at this point has not been named. The developer, interesting enough, picks the street names, and they turn in the preliminary plat. That's one of our notes on the plat, and he's considering that, and we had some issues that we gotta deal with as far as drainage and some other things related to the construction plans. As far as the preliminary plat goes, everything's technically correct. This is gonna be a short little street with 12 new lots in Junction City off Eads Drive. And Eads is off of Grubbs, which is off of 127. Make your way back there. But again, this is a short little subdivision street with potentially 12 new homes in the city of Junction City. And again, you can kind of see the plat. Because this is a cul-de-sac street under our subdivision regulations that we've recently adopted, they are going to pursue developing these under the new standards, which means sidewalks are not required in Junction City or Perryville on cul-de-sac streets, just through streets. Now you can do one side a wider sidewalk or two sides of sidewalk, but on cul-de-sac streets, sidewalks aren't required. There are no sidewalks out in this area of the community anyhow, so developer won't be putting sidewalks in, but there will be street lights, curb gutter, everything else that you know on the street section. And again, the bond, as you know, is already in place. The construction plans are already in place. And they still got to sign a developer contract, pay us an admin fee, and then they're ready to start moving dirt once the plat's approved.
And this will be maintained by the city?
This will be a city street. We can't,
City maintenance, not the development.
right, but we can't assure that until the project's done and it's done properly. This is preliminary plat showing this will be a public street, but it doesn't become the city's until it's built correctly. So that's why we're holding the bond, that's why we start the process, but you don't know what could happen over 2 or 3 or however many years, and there's a chance something could go wrong in the construction, and the city may choose not to accept it for some technical reason, but that's why we hold the bond and start this process, and we have a developer contract in case they do something incorrectly on the construction. And we've also took this to the city of Junction City at their last meeting, just to give them a heads up that they had a major plat filed in their town, and talked to them about the street lights and the sidewalks in general with the new subregs change. And they were happy to see the project.
Commissioner Manning makes a motion to approve.
I'll second that one.
Commissioner Douglas, seconds. Any discussion, motion? All in favor?
It is fine. There was a lot of pre-work done, good work done.
Next, we have Donnie King, Francis Neal, and Jenny Upton have applied for the subdivision of a 7.277 acre tract. It's located at 4375 Lebanon Road in Danville. The property's zoned ag. AG is a surveyor. And this plat divides the Donnie King and Francis Neal parent tract into tracts B1 and B2. Tract B2 becomes a non-conforming tract and is then combined with the neighboring Ronald Dale and Deborah Walls property. This plat also serves to retrace the property of Jenny Upton, shown as tract number 1. Utility signatures are being acquired, and the plat's ready for final approval.
Are we separating out track one from the rest, or is this already been? I thought that you didn't have less than 1 acre out there to subdivide into, is that correct?
Tract 1 is an existing tract. He's simply
Retracing it.
retracing the boundary.
It's existing, yeah.
Mr. Manning moved for approval. Commissioner Boyd seconds. Discussion. All in favor?
Lastly, we have Paul Frystresser. He's applied for the subdivision of a 4.387 acre tract at 101 Kelm Avenue in Danville. The property is zoned highway business. AGE is the surveyor. This plat is submitted in order to alter an existing utility easement, and it's filed in conjunction with Frystresser's site plan that was approved 2/23/22. The plat's ready for final approval.
This was one of the conditions of the site plan you all approved last month, to explore that utility easement on the east side of the property. And if their desire was to abandon that section of easement, so then the buildings could be constructed all, into portion of that easement. When they went and met with Danville Utilities, they found there were still utilities down on the south end of that easement, so that's staying in place on the southeastern corner of that property by the existing storage buildings, but there's no utilities in the northern section, so that's being abandoned with this replat. So then the construction can move forward on the site plan for the storage buildings. The other two conditions were a landscape plan and the drainage calculations to be submitted, and we're still waiting on those before we can move forward with the zoning permit.
Commissioner Griffin, motion for approval. Second. Commissioner Ruby, second the motion. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes.
Before we jump into the public hearings, let me just mention one other plat that's not on your list, just for your information. There was another plat recorded this month that's not before you, and I just want to make sure you guys know this, that we do have a provision in our subregs that exempts certain plats from planning commission review, and it's sort of tied into the state law to some degree. And there was a plat that came into our office kind of in a preliminary fashion late, and their desire was maybe to get it in front of you guys, but it was subdividing the Inman Farm out on Highway 52, but it was doing it in great big slices, and actually our subregs do not require any subdivisions over 20 acres or greater that's zoned ag, that do not involve a new street or easement, to be reviewed by the planning commission. So those are exempt from your review. So the surveyor turned it into us just to look at it, and they were chopping up the property in some different configurations, and then that goes straight to the courthouse. Interesting enough, when the surveyor took it to the courthouse, they were like, how come P&Z's hasn't signed this, and kind of kicked it back and said you can't do that. But technically, we do allow plats over 20 acres that are farm plats to be directly recorded and divided by deed or by plat that doesn't come through your all's review.
So they're not changing the ag category at all? That's not
No, they're
touched.
just chopping up the farm,
Just chopping
and it
up,
was over
okay.
20 acres, so for expediency and to get to a closing, they just took it straight to the courthouse, and it bypasses this body. And again, we occasionally see farm plats, we don't charge for them, it's a courtesy review or retracements. We like to see them just so we can get them in our GIS system, but it's not required for you all to approve farm tracts over 20 acres by way of our subregs.
Thank you for the information.
Yeah.
All right, we have a public hearing that item, in Wolf County Planning Zone Commission, filed an application to modify use regulations of the Wolf County zoning ordinance. Any motion to bring the item off the table?
I'll make a motion to take them off the table.
Motion, Commissioner Bennett,
Second.
and a second, Commissioner Davenport. So, public hearing is reconvened.
No, y'all need to vote.
Oh, we need to vote.
Vote on it, sorry.
All right, let's vote on that motion. All in favor? I was getting ahead of myself. Motion passes.
Yep.
Now we have reconvened the public hearing. Do we want to go straight to the public?
Well, I want to lead off with just something real quick, so I explain what's in your packet. What was tabled last month is what you see up there on the screen, which is in front of you. It's been retitled with today's date, and it says 50 megawatt and 50 megawatt industrial option. And that's the language exactly what we tabled last month. That's what we're kind of now calling the hybrid option, where we were making the splits on 50 megawatts when we stay ag and when we would require an industrial zone to be located. Last month, as you know, I think when we discussed this option, Henry fixed some wordsmithing. All that's been corrected in this document, so all the changes to the words tracks and lots, all that's been fixed. And that's really the only change. But there was some discussion about give us an option where everything's just industrial. You know, we just make it a little more simpler than this hybrid option, what we'll call it, and we just go with an industrial option. So in your packet, you actually had 3 drafts of this 2 pages. We had the hybrid version where we kind of left it from last month, or technically we're picking up from. I did a draft where everything is just industrial. If you're a merchant electric generating facility over 10 megawatts, by state definition, thou shalt be located in an industrial zone. So it shortens the page slightly, takes a paragraph off. That's really the only difference. Then just to give you another option, I did what I'll call the agriculture option, and those are all labeled in your packet on that front page, so you can clearly see. Now there's kind of 3 options coming from the staff, just to show you how the language could be with the hybrid, with an all-industrial, or if you leave it in an ag zone with the standards. And the standards are exactly the same in all 3 options. The only difference is 50 megawatts makes the split on one option. One, everything's industrial, the other, they stay ag. So we just wanted to throw that out to you to give you guys kind of see how all the verbiage would work, and really whatever option y'all choose is fine with us.
Would you mind getting a little bit more in detail?
Sure.
Not all of it, but.
Sure.
On the 2 new ones.
Yep.
Just give us a synopsis
I-
of what.
Okay, yep, so I'll do that pretty quickly. And then the last thing before I jump into that, the other thing we were kind of tabling on was the state legislation that's pending. And I've been watching that pretty closely, and the House Bill 392 went through the House, kind of flew through the Senate. The Senate then swapped the Senate committee on it, which is really kind of the House Senate Bill 69. That has now passed the Senate and is sitting in the House to be concurred on, since the Senate swapped some things on the House bill. So that has now had 6 positive readings in the legislature, and is sitting back at the House for concurrence, and they'll put that on their orders of the day at some point.
What are the major issues of that?
Nothing has really changed. It's similar. The bills really haven't changed much. They revised who serves on the ad hoc committee. They made sure that if decommissioning is done at the local level, it's an option and has primacy over the state decommissioning verbiage,
So that allows the county to require decommissioning?
if they choose. But both state bills, all the bills require decommissioning at the state level in very detailed fashion. Nothing was changed in either bill that allows us to deviate from the setbacks like we're doing. So whatever happens in the legislature or doesn't happen really doesn't affect our document at all. And
Now-
we're not looked at it at this point.
I looked at it briefly over the weekend, what I thought I saw, and I was still questioning industrial zoning or agricultural categories, whether they had resolved that between the Senate and the House. I'm not sure that's clear
All
yet.
the amendments that were filed in the Senate were pulled back off
Yeah,
with the Senate substitute, and they don't really dictate anything at the local level, then that we have the ability to deviate from the setbacks and adopt our own decommissioning standards rules, licenses, or processes.
Okay,
And if we do, they have primacy over the state law if there's duplicate processes.
so we're waiting for the House to do their due process.
On concurring with the Senate. approved
Yes, they
bill.
have to look at the document as presented from the Senate, and they have to decide whether it's
And
yes or no.
It's in their queue to do concur on several bills. I think they wait to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the Rules Committee, yeah. That's a good way to say it.
But if you look at their orders of the day, the House tends to hold off on all those concurrent bills and do it on those days that don't count towards the 60-day count.
That's
They have
right.
days for that, so. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't pass, again, I don't think it affects anything in our ordinance at all. We're deviating from the setbacks, which is allowed under the state law,
Right.
current and past. They didn't change that. And the other verbiage, we'd be requiring possibly an industrial rezoning and a site plan and a fire protection plan. So we've added some extra elements, but the state law covers a lot of stuff,
Yes, it does.
so. So at this point, I'll just walk you through the difference. I won't go through the 50 megawatt split option. You guys looked at that, talked about that enough. I think in general, as you know, we were saying, if a facility is being proposed under 50 megawatt, it could stay agriculture, but you got to follow all the rules for a site plan, landscape plan, fire protection plan. All our standard setbacks were they're triggered under either option. The difference is you would have to zone industrial if you were over 50 megawatts. So if you go to the version that we've got there, it says industrial only option. Really, the only big change is the chart. You cross out for P in the chart, which means it's not allowed in the ag zone at all. You take out the paragraph that says anything about agriculture, and you just start with the same standards right here, require the state standards to be complied with. And here, site plan. So what's missing here was a paragraph that said, if you're ag, you do it this way. If you're industrial, you zone industrial. The 50 megawatt split language is all that's different. Everything else is exactly the same in all three versions. Site plan, setbacks, deeper setbacks from churches, et cetera. Landscaping, fire protection, outdoor storage, it's all the same language in all three options. Not being located in the floodplain, again, none of the verbiage is different in any of the three options other than triggering the industrial rezoning. The ag language, when you go to it, everything kind of stays the same. The only difference is this paragraph is added in. It talks about, again, what's this one right here? We just take out the verbiage about industrial zoning. So it's pretty straightforward, and I think that's what you all kind of said, the hybrid option. I think the problem was, we kind of just pulled 50 megawatts as a split. Is 60 a better number, 40 a better number? It was just kind of a judgment call. This kind of makes it a little simpler in nature, which these type of facilities are either in an industrial facility or we are going to leave them in an agricultural zone with kind of a whole host of standards they have to adhere to.
Yes, some other information, are we gonna do that, or are we gonna do the hearing part before we do?
The information I had on the other facility,
Yes,
yeah, I can do that now, and then, there's folks here to speak, and I won't jump ahead of them. So I put a few things on the PowerPoint here. Most of these slides were on the previous PowerPoints, and, there's a facility that I think we all know, that's the one up there, 66 acres up there off I-64. These are just pictures, just individual photos, but what I wanted to show you was, some of these were just from other PowerPoints that we saw last month. But this is the facility that's currently being built on the south side of Lancaster. It's called Turkey Creek. It's a 50 megawatt facility on approximately 485 acres. And just thought I'd show you this because there were some questions about other things. I've been up to that site. Lisa's been to the site. I think our chairman's gone up there and looked at it. They're moving dirt as we speak. It's a big project. You're looking at pretty much that whole facility is going to be concrete, gravel, or pavement. It's hard to see in scale, but these black lines right here are actually paved 2-lane roads. Those aren't gravel roads, those are asphalt roads that are 18-foot wide. Again, just for scale, that's how big this project is, and it's only a 50 megawatt, 485 acres. There's 17 drainage basins on that property, and what you see there is actually about 60% lot coverage. So in this project, with the setbacks, drainage, there's only about 60% of that property is being developed. The other thing, when you zoom in closer to this exhibit, it shows it in kind of another kind of fashion. But this is kind of like more of a site plan. It shows the pillars, the concrete kind of cylinders, and the way how deep they are in the ground. Each pier is approximately about 4 feet above the ground. With the panels, it's about 6 foot under the ground. And then this shows the fencing, barbed wire fencing, or chain link fence with barbed wire. Interesting enough, this whole facility, the landscaping is going to be inside the fence as opposed to outside the fence. Probably for operations and all these street networks they're building in there. There's a subdivision right here, and I drove back here, and you can get right back here, and they're moving a lot of dirt right now. Everything's being cleared off. Everything you see is going to be gravel, concrete, or asphalt, except for the setback areas and the basins. The fencing requirements, interesting enough, again, there was some talk about fencing. That is required under federal standards. Anytime you have an electrical grid, substation, and these are extensions, there has to be chain link fence with barbed wire. And so all that verbiage is on this site plan, which I thought was interesting. We pulled this off the Public Service Commission's website. The last part is this. I thought this was interesting. This is the case log. This project started in 2020. And when I say the state law is complicated, those are all the data entries of all the process things that had to happen at the state level. This is in Garrett County, county judges involved, there can be local hearings, there's documents, site plans, environmental assessments, federal laws that have to be adhered to. So under our current state law, it's a very complicated process to get a project cited through the state, and that took over 2 years. And again, I think there's 30-some individual steps that you see had to happen at the state level for this one project. So, and that's a 50 megawatt facility, which actually is fairly small. There's several in the queue on the state, 80 megawatt. I think the biggest one that's being proposed statewide is a 100 megawatt facility right now. So I've just played around on the Public Service Commission's website and pulled some of that stuff for you. And that's all I have, unless you guys have any questions of us or Henry.
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, whatever we do today will be forwarded on to the county for their.
Correct. We just do a recommendation on a text. We are actually technically amending the zoning ordinance, and we forward that to the county for their consideration, and they can concur, they can reword it, they can toss it out, say start again. Mercer County's been working on an ordinance for a couple of years and have sent several drafts to the fiscal court, which they've rejected until just recently. Mercer County just passed their ordinance in they did a 2-step adoption, and they just adopted what they call their level 3 solar, which is the large stuff. P&Z just passed it by a vote of 5-2 and sent it to fiscal court, I think for the 4th time. Fiscal court's rejected every draft that the planning commission sent. So in that situation, there's a chance we could send them a draft and they could vote it down and say start over, or they could say we like it, or they could say let's add a paragraph or two. And yeah.
Thank you, Director. So at this point, we'll go to the audience for any public comment. I guess we'll let people come forward, state your name, your address, and address the commission.
Hi, Sally Bright, 3456 Lexington Road here in Danville. Wow, when I see that 50 megawatt, and you tell me that it's all pavement and concrete and gravel under there, that makes me really nervous. So I'm with Smart Growth Boyle. We've been to all the hearings and, sort of, the main thing we're worried about, we're all in favor of solar, but it's how it's done to protect the property that it's on is really what we're mainly worried about. I saw one photo there that looked great because it had cattle under the solar panels. It had flowers under there. And that is what we really want to impress, is that it's important to have these things specified. The things that we're interested in are, runoff, how you mitigate runoff, how you have requirements that make sure that that's controlled, that that's not a major problem. When you've got subdivisions, you've got close neighbors, lighting is a big thing to consider, how you're going to have low lighting that doesn't, have a major impact on the neighbors there. I was glad to hear that the federal regulations require fencing around these facilities so that, that protects the facility and it keeps also somebody from wandering in and, an accident happening or whatever. Also, what happens when the solar facility goes out, if it does, what will happen to that property? What are the requirements for getting everything out of there? And if it's on a farm, then, that will be farmed again, hopefully. There will be, it won't be ruined to farming, to growing things there. So the problem with the industrial option of just everything being zoned industrial is that then if the facility goes out, then, it's still zoned industrial. And so we wondered if you guys could consider requiring a conditional use permit, so that all these things can be specified before a facility goes in. And keeping it, if it's keeping to an agricultural zone, but they have to get a conditional use permit, then, we can specify these things. So that's what we're really worried about and interested in, and hope that you'll consider these things that I've mentioned. I think, and performance bonds, that's, part of the cleanup and disposal part of it. So it is a very complicated issue, as you all know, and just it makes my head spin. So we're very grateful to all of you for finding out everything you can about this. It's coming, and it's a wonderful thing in many, many ways. So just hope that you'll consider these things we've mentioned. Thank you.
I think I'd like to respond to some of your comments. As far as the zone change, any conditions will be provided in that as well. We put conditions on every zone change we've ever done. So, conditions would be applied. And we can do conditions to some degree on our site plans as well. We put some verbiage in the other option that we can put conditions
The decommissioning language in the bill is the decommissioning language in the proposed bill is pretty stringent and talks about returning the land to its prior condition. So that's something that would be accounted for under the current draft that we're seeing, the House Bill 392.
But if it doesn't happen,
Sure, that's right.
My comment on if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, because we're not in the business of breaking down projects. You know, if we build a factory or a shopping center and it goes bankrupt or goes dark, P&Z is not in the business of going back there and pulling up blacktop and tearing down buildings. I mean, we don't have the capability, we don't have the staff. Even if we were holding the bond, the idea that we're gonna go back to use that Turkey Creek model, and somehow we're gonna reclimate 485 acres and pull up concrete and gravel and pull pillars, you know, if they leave and take all the panels and torch them off at the ground, and there's concrete, steel, and gravel, and the idea that we're gonna go back and that all the topsoil is being removed from that site. I mean, it's being trucked off right now.
there's no way to keep that from happening when they put sites here as well.
I mean, when we build Danville, we oversee construction, but we don't make any developer verify to us how we're gonna take it back to its natural state if it doesn't work out. That's on the subdivision, shopping center, industrial. We just don't do that. We hold bonds, as you just saw, for construction projects are gonna happen in the 1 to 3 year window where we're building the street. And we're holding the bond, and the developer's required to build it, and we're just backstopping that with some money. The idea that we're gonna hold a bond for 10, 20, 30, 40 years that would need to be millions of dollars, and we're gonna hold that money, or hold some letter of credit or performance bond, and then if this project goes away, then we're gonna go out there as this commission, this staff right here, and figure out how we're gonna take that land back to the natural state. It's just not something I feel we're capable. Now, a bigger planning commission, maybe, but I believe this belongs at the state. My personal opinion is this belongs at the state level. They're more capable, the Cabinet for Natural Resources, and this is what they do for coal and other things, and the landowner. Yeah.
Not if they sell it to them.
They're not selling it to them.
They don't always go on lease them.
They're leasing them.
These people bought them at Lancaster, they own that land.
I don't know what they're doing over there. We can deal with what we have here.
Again, from the staff's perspective, we'd strongly recommend decommissioning not be part of our ordinance.
And I support that from day one. The idea of decommissioning is a rather large ball of activities. It needs a state-level guidance and control. It is not something we need to take on with this. We can't do this with this structure that we have.
What do you say, Henry? We see how this might work some way through the state.
It is in the bill. I think the bill has a chance of making it so punitive that it might not even be a totally realistic possible in the state, but it's currently in the bill, and the bill's been moving forward. So I definitely agree, having seen people try and stretch planning and zoning to fill various roles of enforcement and cleanup and construction, that would be an extremely tall order for this staff or even for county government.
Any other comments? Steve, can you go back to that slide you had of the Lancaster facility with cross-section of one of the piers where now you see in the middle on the bottom, the depth of that concrete slab that's under each tower? Now imagine a field of those scattered across it with gravel between them.
Blacktop.
And blacktop, and think how you're gonna refine it to a further farmland with grass and hay growing on it.
Well, they're moving the topsoil off site too, so literally, if you could get all our infrastructure, the impervious surface removed, you would have to somehow go out and buy 500 acres of topsoil or some sort.
1,100 in our.
Well, it's whatever, but in our county, but, I mean, the idea that, again, better make sure the bond's good and that it's adjusted for inflation, 'cause you imagine trying to hold a bond for 20 or 40 years to do a project of that magnitude, and hope you have enough money down the road to do it, if you could do it.
My point being, the chances of reclaiming the land to its original thing is a tremendous task. I mean, to me, impossible to do. So, that's all.
Yes.
Okay.
State your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. Good morning. My name is Alan Norval. I live at 237 Pinehurst Court in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm here with my mother, who lives at 505 Tinnicket here in Boyle County in Danville. And she also owns a farm on the east side of Perryville. So that's why we wanted to come today and express our support for one of the three options that you have under consideration this morning. So I'll tell you a little bit about the farm first and in its history. It's again located in just east of Perryville. It's an L-shaped property. It actually has frontage on 150 and on 68 coming in from Harrodsburg. Its current use is that it's leased out to a tenant farmer, John and Helm, to farm and lease, graze, and crop. We also use it for recreational use. It's about 200 acres in total. We have a cabin there. We have birthday celebrations, family events, graduation ceremonies. There's ponds, we fish, we have horses, and a cabin. I think I mentioned that. It has been in our family since my great-grandfather. In the mid to late 80s, my grandfather passed away. At that point, my dad purchased the farm from the estate, from his siblings. And I don't know that any of you have, at one time, he served on this commission. I don't know that, I don't recognize that any of you may have served with him on that at that time, but Tommy Norval was his name, and he served on this commission. So after his death in 2015, my mom has been the sole owner of the property. And over the last maybe 4 years or so, we've had several solar companies approach us. We've only actually had serious discussions with two. The first group that we talked to, we got to a point where we actually executed an option to lease the property, but then they decided not to go forward with their project. So we never actually executed a lease with that group. The second group, we've been in discussions for several months. As you talk about, there are several provisions in those leases, and we've been going back and forth with them. The decommissioning obviously is part of that. So we have not executed a lease yet with that group, but we've been talking to them since September, so that's the current status of where we are. So we understand that you are considering three options this morning. With that background, just wanted to express what our support for the option that we support, and that would be the agricultural option. We feel that would be the most flexible in terms of the farmers and the situation that they are in. There would be one adjustment to the proposed agricultural option. As we understand it, I think there's a requirement in there that 50% be retained for agricultural use. So our support would be for you to consider removing that requirement from that agricultural option. For instance, in our particular situation, it wouldn't be all that impactful. As part of the negotiations, the exclusion zone is a big part of the discussion with the solar company, and we have always wanted to retain a sizable piece in the exclusion zone so that we can continue to enjoy the property. So the cabin, the barns, and the areas that we use for the horses, and the ponds and all of that, the hunting areas, all that is still areas that we would include. So generally, in our discussions, the exclusion zone has been anywhere from 40 to 60%. So we're right around the number that's in there, but But I could see where that would be, depending on the characteristics of the property that's under consideration, that might be less flexibility than would be optimal in terms of making a project work, both from the standpoint of the solar company and the property owners that are leasing to the solar company and the neighbors as well. But, so that would just be one suggestion for you to consider there to that. So to close, just why are we and our family considering this option for a farm that's been in our family for 5 generations and that we're still enjoying and using? From a financial standpoint, it actually makes the farm more sustainable for our family in terms of being able to afford it going forward. Yes, we do lease that out, but right now that doesn't cover all of our expenses to keep that in. So my mom supplements that. It's not a source of retirement income for her. She supplements that. I supplement that because myself, my family, my boys are the one who are spending the most time there. So that would make that, from our standpoint, just more sustainable to keep it in our family for a long period of time if that option was available to us and we could ultimately enter a lease with a company that was satisfactory to us. So we want to be able to continue that in recreational use. As I've said, one of the key negotiating points for us is the size of the exclusion zone and the particular areas that are included in the exclusion zone so that we can continue to use the parts that we enjoy. And then it would turn it from being something my mom is supplementing into a source of retirement income for her going forward as well. And so that's another, it's a financial consideration as well. So was there anything you wanted to add to those comments? Okay, I appreciate the time this morning to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Did the company tell you where they're going to plug into?
Yes, there's the substation that's like within a quarter of a mile from the western property line of our property. So yes, that's where they've got targeted to plug in. And the transmission line cuts right across our farm as well.
And you were going to end up with more than 10 acres of solar panels then? Is what
Oh,
you're
yes,
saying.
there's 200 acres. So they are looking, they wanted the whole 200 acres. That's a deal killer for some of those companies that we talked to, right? So the ones that we've talked to, to any extent, have been the ones flexible and willing to work with us on that exclusion zone. That's our number one requirement when talking to them. What we've got an 80-acre area that we just is non-negotiable. If you can't live without that, we're not going to talk to you. And so the company that currently we're with, they've agreed to that 80 acres. They might not use the other 120. They might not use all of that, depending on how they are able to put the project footprint together with the other properties, adjoining properties. But we didn't want to be stuck where they only maybe tied up our property and only ended up leasing 10 acres from us or something like that.
yeah.
So we got them to agree to pay us for a minimum of 80 acres, regardless of how many they ultimately end up to use. Now, again, we haven't signed this particular lease, but that part's we've gotten past that in the negotiations with them. So they'll lease anywhere from 80 to 120 acres if we're able to strike an agreement with them. Thank you.
Go ahead. Ann Ferguson, 645 Kings Mill Road, Danville. The director is absolutely correct. You send what you send to the fiscal court. I certainly hope that each of you has done his or her due diligence. Kentucky has come late to the solar energy table, and Boyle County has come even later. There are other counties that already have ordinances in place, and I can't help wondering if you all have had the opportunity to look at what other zoning boards have decided to do.
After we were here last month and we saw the PowerPoint presentation about Turkey Creek, we drove over there. We went in the main gate and drove up to the top of the hill and looked all around. We saw the very large drills that are there. It reminded us a bit of the heavy equipment we witnessed for years in West Virginia when the lands were stripped of their coal. We drove around and we stayed in the car. Nobody said anything to us, and we looked all around. We saw all the cars that were parked there. There are many, many people working there, and they'll be working there until next fall. We thought about, after we left there, we thought about these cylinders that are being drilled into the ground. I think you said maybe 6 feet deep, 4 feet above, with a metal support in for the panels. We had talked to, Charles had talked to a worker there who said the ground's very hard and they couldn't use any, couldn't use backhoes or anything like that. They had to drill these cylinders. They'll be filled with concrete and supported with steel. We had seen earlier in January at Brown Power Plant the finished product, which is very nice to look at, and KU takes good care of it. It's secure, and KU also has an agreement with Shakertown, which I think is very interesting. We'll have to go back and look now that the weather's better. Shakertown sends its sheep over to spend the summer under the panels, and that reduces their cost of mowing and maintenance, and it prevents the distribution of gravel and asphalt on that ground. I know it's a difficult situation. It's hard, and I understand that. But I do hope that this Planning and Zoning Commission will send to the fiscal court the very best document that it can produce. Don't settle for expediency. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name's Jerry Gurman. I too am a 5th or 6th generation farmer, born here, live here at 424 Faulkner Station Road. And I've been keeping up with what's going on here, and I'd like to make sure I understand correctly what's transpired. 4 months ago, I could have put in a solar facility, a commercial solar facility on my farm as long as I had a 500-foot setback. That was in your regulations that for the whole world to see, and everybody knew what it was. Evidently, someone has heard about the developments that are pending or in process or being thought about. And as a result, the fiscal court has told you all to stiffen up your regulations for solar power production. And in that process, you, in conjunction with Steve, have developed 3 proposals to try to meet that mandate from the fiscal court. The fiscal court didn't tell you to keep us from having solar energy. I think everyone is in agreement that solar energy is a good thing. It's a renewable energy. we're not depleting our oil reserves or our natural gas reserves. And today, it's the most economical way to produce electricity. So I have submitted a letter to all of you with my thoughts about solar energy and what's good and what would work and be good for our community. You all have given us, letting us look at 3 proposals. All three proposals have the same requirements, 2.5 pages that aren't there today of additional requirements in order to produce solar energy on a commercial basis. I think those requirements are reasonable. They appear to be, they're significantly more than is required today. And as a property owner, I would want those, if I didn't have planning and zoning, I would want those requirements to let solar energy be on my farm. The thing that I would say to you is that I think requiring a zone change to industrial or a conditional use permit, I hadn't heard about that before. I think that could very well keep people from doing it. We've all seen the emotion that gets involved when a zone change is taking place. It looks to me like if we could meet the requirements that you all have suggested, in addition to the federal requirements and the state requirements, that should allow us to progress here and have good solar energy managed in a reasonable and a fair way to the farmer. Please don't take an opportunity away from the farmer here. Let him do it, and let him do it properly. Thank you all for what you do every day in our community. I'm proud to live here. I'm proud of what planning and zoning has done in the past, and I appreciate your service. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mary Robin Spoonamore. I reside 5035 Lancaster Road. And some of you weren't here perhaps in January, but I was involved because my family considered a solar contract for around a 400-acre tract of land that my dad owns. And my dad was very interested because it seemed a good option as he is almost 80 years old and still farming. And so we declined that particular contract. However, we both left the experience hoping that Boyle County would not create an ordinance so strict that solar companies would not even consider operating or approaching farmers, and farmers perhaps could get left out of such an opportunity as they go to the surrounding counties with less stringent requirements. So it's been quite the learning process for me, and I thank you for all the time and thought you've put into learning about solar because it's a very deep subject. I think something good is that I wanted to mention is that landowners and land conservationists agree quite a bit. There is quite a bit of overlap, as Mr. Gurman and as Mrs. Bright and the Norvalls and Fergusons attested to that. I think we all want it done right with, no light pollution and proper security and proper fire and the erosion and runoff issues addressed. And even the idea of pollinators and bees and sheep, I think there's no farmers that would say those are not bad ideas. The one specific use standard, as Mr. Norville stated about the 50% staying agricultural, I did think about that in terms of our own farm. The solar company was interested in us selling them the silo and the barn, and it just became difficult to imagine farming corn when having no place to put it, or farming cattle and having no barn. And so, and that was where those items are very appealing piece of land to them because they did face the south. So it was just one of those things where I feel like that particular standard might want to be readdressed so you don't get in the position of what I kind of termed as faux farming, where you kind of pretend to farm by putting a few tomatoes in the ground here and there and then call it agricultural. Anyway, but I think overall the Pacific use standards are very well thought out, and I feel like they could suffice as a good boundary for solar companies and farmers to follow without the need to change from ag to industrial. What I learned in this past 3 months with many conversations with Mr. Hunter is that a zone change from agricultural to industrial has never been successfully completed in Boyle County with land that is not contiguous to the Danville city limits. So I didn't realize what a high probability of a zone change being as successful was. But am I correct? Is that correct, Steve, that there really hasn't been a zone change ever historically in Boyle County unless the land touches the city of Danville?
The only two that in our archives are two large residential rezonings.
Mm-hmm.
Old Ridge and Hunt Farm. Everything else is either in one of the cities. There's small zone changes that have occurred, parcel by parcel, maybe a couple acres here and there. But has there been a large zone change, residential, commercial, industrial, Boyle County? There is not. And most, probably because most of those uses would have required a sewer, for example, a large shopping center. And so naturally, those zone changes occur around the fringes of the city where there's already infrastructure. So,
Would you, is it correct to say that like a zone change from ag to industrial would be like a very, very high bar and perhaps like one of the most strictest in the state?
of the other counties that have adopted models, they've all sort of just gravitated to the cookie cutter ordinance that circulated the state, and a lot of them are doing conditional use permits, a requirement to zone industrial. We'd be unique if that was our requirement, although that's just what Mercer County just adopted, was that they, large-scale solar have to only be located in industrial zones. That's their most recent proposal. But high bar, it probably is, but I never say it's not possible. Every zone change is possible, but it is a public hearing, and it will be a public hearing, so we can't predict how those go. But traditionally, there's not been a lot of zone changes out in the county.
Okay, so,
And historically, we've never had the thought that a solar farm would be that big. You know, all I've ever seen when I was growing up and going through college even 30 years ago, a solar farm is what's going to be on your roof of your house. That's all we ever thought. So the opportunity is a little different today. And you're right, the category of doing that is a unique characteristic.
I feel like the distillery zoning might be a precedent that this board made that we could follow in that the solar panels and the bourbon and the barrel are both soaking in the sun, and they were required to to comply with the specific use standards and then as well have a site plan, which is a public hearing. Am I correct? The site plan is when you like actually see what's going to happen on the ground, and so when that's presented under an agricultural zoning, and you have your drawings by the engineers and everything in front of you, and you all feel or think that these specific use standards, the A through H on your draft there, if you feel those are strong, regulations, then they should suffice, into an ordinance that we feel like we're serving Boyle County well without going through the zone change that is like very often adding a very sometimes volatile but political element into each solar project that would come along. Each would sort of be a referendum again on are we going to have solar in Boyle County, and perhaps not necessary if we all agree that we have good rules in place and they can stay ag, follow the rules, and comply, and, you know, comply and serve the farmer and the community. I think that's about all that I was wanting to say, just to very plainly speak my advocation for the remaining ag option on your draft. So thank you again, and thank you for your work. It's been eye-opening to me to see how much service each of you put in, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? No? Let's open discussion. I guess we're at the point where we need to.
Can I,
Discuss or get a motion and discuss the
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question on the 50% coverage, make sure we're all talking the same category? If you have 200 acres of ground, what this proposal, what I'm reading into it, technically 100 acres of it could have the solar panels on that. And that includes, that in that 100 acres, you're going to have your house, maybe, your home, the yard that you live into, that's still in that agricultural category. But that's what we're talking about here. And then we do have a character in here about how far away from those types of residences, especially neighbor residences, that are a big issue and concern on there, you know. And I'm sure if I were living on the house on that property with panels, I'd have a dimension that I would have. And you probably, Novell, I believe you've addressed a lot of those and you understand that. So part of that learning process is an understanding of what should be covered and what should not be covered. And I love the conversations everybody in here has presented. I think it's spectacular. It gives a lot of confidence rather than us sitting by ourselves. That's an important character in here, is having that input. And I hope we never ever lose that opportunity on there. But you're absolutely right. It's a hard topic to come through and hard to list it. And then I have to voice out the opinion is I think we're a complement to what the state legislature is now doing, which is very fluid, as we talked about here, because it will reflect upon what the local category of planning and zoning is going to be even allowed to do, or what we should do. So it's got fluidity back and forth is what we're going to run into here. So I think that's a wonderful character. And it's an understanding in a broader picture what to do with the property, but I also love to hear if you're actually in that situation and it's your property, what are you going to do with it? Because you have your heart and soul in this thing that you've got a long time on. So I think that's a very important factor on here. And I'd love for you guys to do what you want to do. I think that's the right thing to do. And then the other part of it is what we do. We sit here and say, well, we're the neighbors. What do you want if I'm the neighbor? What do I want to see? What do I want to go and where I want to see it? And I appreciate that category too, because Boyle County is a pretty good county, which is why we're doing what we need to do. I wanted to thank you all for coming. That's really part of really what I'm getting to. I think it's wonderful to hear from you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there, can I ask a couple questions, Mr. Chairman? So, I know that we have that, if we make it, if we request a change to industrial, there seems to be a feeling that we never get, no, I'm sorry, that they'd never be able to put something like that in. But if the conditions are the same in ag as they are in industrial, why do you think that industrial would never be approved? No, I understand. Why do you think
It's a
that?
public hearing. It has to be approved under a different standard. A site plan comes in and you guys look at a set of construction plans off a checklist. A zone change, basis of approvals spelled out by the state law, rolls in the comprehensive plan. If today a zone change came into, let's not use for solar, let's just say for a 100-acre factory, came in when the zone ag to industrial. comprehensive plan comes into play, policies, the future land use map.
But what if we said, what if we did exactly the same thing and said, okay, we'll let you, because the farmer wants to be able to have a lease from a company that wants to leases land to put a factory on. And, but we don't want to do the zone change to industrial, but we want to do it with the same exact. Okay, so why would we do that today? I'm not arguing for this, I'm just saying, why would we do that then today with something that we all look at and say it is industrial?
That's where we're at, right here.
That's why I'm at the point where I'm saying, we take off the 50 megawatt, and just say, if it's merchant generated electric, a duck is a duck. And if it is industrial, that's what it is, because they're gonna remove the topsoil. We're not gonna have sheep, there's not gonna be wildflowers. There's just not. They're not gonna be sheep, there's not gonna be wildflowers. It's gonna be concrete in the ground, gravel on top of that, roads on top of that. There's not gonna be pollinators, they don't have sheep out there anyway today, so they're not gonna bring sheep in there to graze under what's not already there. I think the pictures are really pretty, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting in something that is industrial. I love our farmers, and I want them to be able to get lease money from this for a long time, okay? And the lease lengths that they're talking about are gonna be beyond the farmer's lifespans. Maybe. And we know that once they take that topsoil off, it will never be brought back, ever, to that state again. I don't think any of us here can in any reasonable sense even envision ever a way in which anybody goes and brings that back. We're gonna have to be accepting that for this county, that whichever way we do it, it's gonna be what they're doing in Lancaster right now. They're gonna do 1,100 acres here, maybe not all 1,100 acres, but large swaths of it. I think that we ought to, for me at least, I'm gonna say that I can't pretend that what we're looking at isn't something that's industrial use. They're gonna be commercial electric generators.
I,
I have to agree with Tom. I mean, that's the thing I struggle with the most is, to me, it almost looks like a backdoor way of allowing industrial applications. Because I agree, I don't think it's ever going to return to agriculture, to go into agriculture. Area that's a zone, that's in our long-term plan is agriculture. That's a way of bringing industrial in without a zone change. And that's what I struggle with. And so, a duck is a duck. I mean, to me, it looks like it's industrial. And yet we're putting in a process to allow industrial to go into agricultural areas.
We heard two meetings ago, we talked about nobody wanting to like, they're moving beyond small farms to only large farms. But now we've just heard today that they're looking at small farms and smaller farms and putting those together contiguously. I just, for me personally, I just want to live truthfully and say, what is it when you look at the pictures? If we're gonna remove the soil, we're dealing with we're still today dealing with mountaintop removal and the effects of that with water and flooding people away. And today, we're not necessarily gonna remove mountaintops, but we're gonna literally pave Warren County paradise.
Now, I got, and you're on the category, which is the decommissioning thing that we've talked about and the state is really working with. And the ideal was, how do you get back to what you started with? And it's a very difficult task, no doubt there. It's good, it's that, probably the most difficult part of this arrangement here is if suddenly it should not have solar panels on the property, for whatever reasons you have, how do you make it go back to where it was?
No, you can't make it go back to where it was. They're just gonna remain. And what will remain is just gonna remain forever. It's like that. I used to have to travel to San Angelo, Texas, and do presentations out there. And there's a whole section where Walmart could come in and lease the land from the city, okay? And then when they moved, it just sat there abandoned. It never got taken, like, they just moved because they didn't have to. They didn't have to decommission it. They didn't have to do anything with it. They moved into a different place, and it just stayed there forever. Nobody ever bought it. Nobody's ever going to buy it.
All right.
And, well, okay, I understand.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you in the idea that that's a typical category that we get. And we've seen here buildings that Walmart's moved around several times in this structure on here. And the buildings either have to be changed, modified, or adapted as part of our evolution, but we do have them in a location,
Right.
in a regional area.
We have a location for that we're willing to accept that. What I'm saying now is that I'd like to propose that whatever we decide today is going to remain that way. There's nobody's gonna ever make it back there, so we can be honest on that.
Say, you're trying to speculate what's gonna happen in the future
It
here.
is so difficult.
And again, this is going to the zone change from a staff's perspective. When we zone property, how often do we talk about what do we think is gonna happen to that subdivision 50 years from now? We're zoning something out of the book, it's a use. What category does it go in? What requests do they need? What conditions do we need? But we naturally assume everything's gonna be successful and every project's gonna come to fruition. But to sit here and try to figure out, how do we zone property, develop property, but then in the worst case scenario, nothing works out, and we gotta figure out what's the circumstance, not 5 years from now, 20, 40, 50 years from now. I think I'm not even sure that's relevant to this discussion, again, because I don't think we can figure that out. I think we have to decide what are reasonable rules for a project, whether it's a solar farm or a shopping center. And what fits, what zone does it go in, what are reasonable rules, what are the public hearings that are the most applicable to get the comment we want, get conditions if we need it, and we just need to move on. The zone change is slightly tricky because it does involve the comprehensive plan and future land use map, but there's other options the developer would have to make an argument for a zone change request. I personally believe this is the fairest body of any board, and I think we're gonna listen to every applicant fairly, and we're gonna make a determination. But the zone change, as you know, is a high bar, that sometimes you get 5 people in the room, and sometimes you could have 500 people in the room. And so there's a little bit of unpredictability there and I understand where the farmers are coming from. And in fact, I've had so many discussions with these folks, that's why the third option evolved. Because the ag option, I agree with everyone in here that when you look at it, it's clearly an industrial use, just like the rick houses are out there. So it should be in an industrial zone. However, there are some uses that are clearly industrial that we allow in the ag zone. We just do, like a landfill, for example, a rock quarry.
And
So
agricultural property has a lot of what we're talking about. And industrial is such a big category. We're not talking about a machine shop that uses machine oil and has issues running around. This is an electrical architecture, which we allow to go on agricultural all the time. Electrical lines, electrical arrangements, electrical structures. It's non-moving components on here in general, is what it is. Now, there can be some moving minor elements, but in the category of industrial pieces of hardware, it's a piece of metal and concrete out there.
In the
That's what it
state
is.
law, it refers to merchant electric generators as industrial solar.
Yeah.
But in splitting hairs, going back to this, to be fair to all sides, I like the zone change option, the industrial, and just so the farmers know, I don't think it's a no every time. I happen to maybe just be a little utopian in my view, but I think I could already see an argument a developer could make to get a zone change successful. Probably not the comprehensive plan option, that tracks would be hard, but you could make the major changes argument, and I think you could be successful, and I think you all would listen to that. I don't think the zone change is a giant hurdle, it's a hurdle, though.
It's a hurdle.
But the bigger picture is zone change, site plan, state public hearing too. So, there's a lot of steps in this process. I also could see leaving it in the ag option, because we still have the protection of a site plan, which is a public hearing. The downside of that is we get those at the back end of engineering. The zone change happens on the front end of an idea. And we get good conditions at the zone change. I mean, you guys do your job at the zone change. To Ms. Robbins' point, zone changes bring in politics, though, because once it leaves this body and you all have an evidentiary hearing, then it goes to the parent government, and sometimes they concur with your requests, and sometimes they overturn your requests, and things can change. So I understand the reluctance on that.
We keep politics out of decisions, but they don't stay out of decisions when
That,
they leave our
unfortunately. So I see both sides. That's why I made the third option.
hands. We'll decide really what it is. Is it industrial or is it not? I mean, I don't look at that as farming or agricultural in these sense.
I 100% agree, and I want our farmers to be able to get the money for that.
I do too.
I really want our farmers to be able to get the money for that, but I want to call it what it is.
Well, then the industrial option also lets them cover up 100% of the property if they choose.
That's an important point. Yeah,
Yeah.
the industrial lot coverage in the industrial zones is much higher, and making the 50% green space requirement fall out for the industrial option would be helpful in helping.
It would give them even more money.
Right.
I'd like to say that this has been a difficult process for me to get my hands around, because I have a strong belief that people, when they own land, ought to be able to make decisions about what they're going to do on their land. But if you make a decision to create a lease with somebody to have a merchant electric generating facility on your land, you're making a decision to create industry on your land. Let's not kid ourselves, it's not farming. That's my point.
Thank you. Well, I guess small observations that I've, from comments today, that, I mean, I guess I've just got a couple PowerPoints, observations I made. Says, it's obvious that solar is not as environmentally friendly as perceived. I think we can all agree on that. It does change the land. It's gonna change it, probably forever. And then, you know, the question is this an ideal, is it the ideal use of prime farmland? That's something you all come to us every time we do anything. So is it? I don't know. I think it could be the ideal use of some farmland, and that's when you come to, you know, I can be objective in the zone change and see that. And, you know, it's undoubtedly, it's industrial use. I think that's without question. It's a dramatic change to the land for years to come, maybe forever. You know, as I said, I could listen to a zone change request. I could be moved to be in favor of a zone change request with conditions on the right land, the right circumstances. So having said that, I'm also sympathetic to farmers. I'm sympathetic to landowners. You should be able to do what you want your land. But I'm also sympathetic to the fact that our responsibility on this board is not today and tomorrow and now. It's our children, our grandchildren, and their children. What community? How do we leave our community for them? Indiscriminate carte blanche solar farms throughout the county, I wouldn't want to see that. That's the purpose of planning and zoning is to try to have order of what we do and have all things. There's a place for everything, even things that we don't agree about, even things we don't like, but there's still a place for them. You have to have landfills. You have to have rock pools. You have to have, I don't know if we have to have solar or not, but, you know, you have to have farms. I don't think there's any question it's industrial. I could likely accept the site plan approach, as long as we've got teeth to it. I know it's coming, as Steve said, we're coming in the back end of it instead of the front end of it. The one thing that we cannot control the substations. They, you know, these solar, these merchant energy operations, they gravitate to where the substations are. So we have no control of substations. So we have really no control over where these are going to be in the county. Because once they put up a substation, then that becomes the hot real estate for the merchant company. So we have no control over that. Right now, we have 4 substations. Who's to say next week, next month, next year, 10 years, we have twice that many, 3 times that many, 10 times that many. So I think we have to have some restrictions. And it's kind of where my thought process is. And I mean, if Mr. German would like to address the fact of use of the land and how you could ever reclaim that.
I think the industrial thing will be the end of it. We won't be talking about it anymore. And if you're going to do that, in case somebody might be willing to go through all that process, take the 50% out, and I'll just leave the farm and go someplace else, and it'll all be blacktop, and it'll be 100% coverage. That's my opinion.
Well, I mean, our other choice was the ag option with the site plan approval.
Right. I think that's fine, but asking us to go through a zone change and only use 50%, first of all, people are going to gravitate to where they don't have to deal with going through a zone change and all the hearings and all the emotions and all of the scenic views and the prime farmland and the butterflies and the grasshoppers. That's all involved in the zone change. That's not involved in specific, here's what you got to do, here's what we think good planning is, that you've already outlined to us.
And as I said, I think that I can probably accept that form, that site plan. My question to you is the use of the land and the reclamation of the land, or when you put a solar farm on your land, you still consider that?
Well, I'm like the Norvals. I wouldn't want the industrial, I wouldn't want to go away. I'd like to stay on my farm and have my home there and have some land that's not covered in solar panels, that's part of my residence, and maybe I can have a field over here that I can run my cattle on and be a part of that 50% that we're preserving for farmland. And I wouldn't want to lease my farm and say, you take all the topsoil off and put it back. That's not going to happen. Nobody's going to do that.
If they lease it from you now under the ag option and they take all the topsoil off, then you'd be okay with that.
Well, if I'm not, I'll make sure that's in my contract, that you don't take all my topsoil off. I don't have to agree to that.
Doesn't have to be concrete either. I want to point that out. It doesn't have to be concrete and gravel. It could be grass and flowers and stuff. I've seen several of them that are made that way.
I put solar panels on my farm this summer, and there's no concrete. You don't have to have concrete.
I agree with you, and I 100% agree with you when you do it on a small scale. I think that the big business, the company that's coming in, Steve, what do you know about the company that's coming in?
We're all speculating, Dave. I'm not an engineer. I don't have to set a construction plan.
All we can go by is what
we
we
see on the
know is
site.
being built right now.
Well,
And we see the plans and the specs on that.
that landowner agreed to that. I haven't seen his contract, and maybe he didn't lease it. Maybe that is a Rexnord coming to town and blacktopping 50 acres and building a plant, that's truly industrial. Maybe that's what, in that county, maybe they should have had zoned that industrial for an operation like that. But if the Norvals want to continue to have their cabin and some green space, and I'd like to have some cattle, I wish that could be an option for me.
So where do you draw the line?
With allow it in a ag zone, make it a permitted use, and have all the restrictions that you've got today, that you've got in your proposal for it, whether it's in industrial or ag or where it is.
At what point does it become an industrial operation?
Well, I guess when,
You know, like the one in Bearcat.
So if it's one company, let's say that the Normals are different because their property is in a different part of the county than the one company that, right now, we know that there's an intent for a single company to have 3,600 acres in 3 counties that are all contiguous, 1,100 of which are in Boyle County. So that's not the same things with the Normals property. So what we know is that at least that there is a company that wants to come in and do a contiguous 3,600 acres, if I understand it correctly. And that, I can't imagine could be called anything other than industrial. That's what, because at that scale, that's just what it is.
well, is a rock quarry industrial?
It's an industrial use permitted in the ag zone.
Permitted in the ag zone.
Right.
Industrial use is so different that it's not like apples to oranges, it's like apples to Tuesday, I think. A rock quarry compared to 1,100, if we're just only talking about our own county, 1,100 contiguous acres.
Well, I didn't bring you up to beat you up. I just wanted your professional opinion.
I'm not a professional.
Professional farmer and a businessman, and just, what your thoughts were on where does it go from being agricultural to being industrial?
It doesn't. It's a permitted use in an agricultural zone.
To his point, I think that's why the third option evolved. We started with the hybrid because we were trying to figure out the splits. If you trust the rules, and you think the site plan's enough of a protection, I can see the ag standard possibly being okay as a starting point, maybe as a baby step. We consider, we make it, it's a permitted use, but it has a host of standards, as you see.
This-
We have a standard that says you gotta run some sheep on it.
That's not in your standards. Well, sure, you could put,
Maybe we have, the developer has to plant black-eyed Susans or something. Could be. They're gonna go to the next county where they just pour the concrete.
Well, the issue is, they still have to come to this body with the site plan every single time. Still have to go through the state, there's still a hearing process at the state. There's still a lot of hoops to jump through. And if we think the zone change is too high a bar, maybe is a deterrent to actual development, we don't know those answers. But maybe the first step is to take the ag option today. Unfortunately, we'd have to test the first project and see if it turns out right. And if it doesn't, we move to the stricter standard. Clearly, the industrial standard's a tad bit stricter. It's 2 steps versus 1. But to Jerry's point, Sherman's point, it's the same standards. You're going to get the same stuff.
And I think that's where I was kind of transitioning, because the idea of industrial, in my mind, there's a lot of industrial categories. And my lending here is a merchant electric generating. It's not in that category. Yeah, it's an industrial type of thing, but it's not, in my mind, what an industrial industry place is.
Well, it's an industrial use by default. I mean, without
I know.
use
As a term.
That goes in at your all's discretion. You
That's-
all can choose an industrial use goes in a commercial zone.
That's my point, is what it comes down.
But a lot of it's gonna be what it looks like.
Well, we don't know that
When someone thinks it's industrial, the way they think it's.
Till we get
Maybe
a
that's a nice way to do agriculture.
Till we get a project, we just don't know.
Mr. Boyd has something.
Mr. Garman and Mary Robbins, as farmers, I have a question for you. Our requirement if it's an ag zone, to have 50% of the property remain in agricultural use. If I'm a farmer and own land, I want to decide that this field I'll lease for solar, and maybe this field, but maybe I want to keep it for my agriculture. But I would rather it be my decision than planning and zoning say, if I lease this, then it's going to tie up with other requirements, some of my other land.
Well,
Do you agree with that?
Yes, yes, sir. It's kind of like the man that won the lottery and won $1 million, and he said he was going to farm with it as long as he could. Maybe if I can at least 50% of my farm for solar, I can farm the other, keep farming the other half.
But it's your decision, that's
Right.
my point.
Right.
Well, and the 50% is variable too. I mean, so let's keep that in mind. I just showed you a project where they covered up, it's an intense project, they only covered up 60%. We've got setbacks built in ours, which is going to obviously, just the setbacks alone, you're not getting to 100%. 50% rule in there, if that was problematic for your particular project, you all need to cover up 72%.
Exactly.
And that's what the Board of Adjustments is built for. Come in and ask for a 20% variance on the 50% rule. I doubt that would be very problematic. It's not unreasonable to say, hey, we'd like a little bit more coverage. But the 50% is the baseline, because we personally think if you're gonna stay in the agricultural zone, and we did it with the distilleries, it really, that's where the language evolved from. That we're gonna stick in industrial use out in the county, due to rural county, we made the caveat that thou shalt still be a 50% agriculture. But
Yep.
if you need to deviate from that, there's a process, and that's more an administrative process to some degree, it's still involved. It's a variance. So I think there's flexibility built into that option. I wouldn't worry about the 50% rule as much as you think. I think this change between industrial and ag, I really just think that's a decision you are gonna have to make. And it may work out, maybe something we have to revisit. I am just slightly concerned that a zone change could be a deterrent. I don't know that answer.
Well, it might be a deterrent for people doing it, it wouldn't be a deterrent for me.
Not for us, not for us.
I wouldn't, I could take what they were, and I could make a decision based on the argument they made, and I can see situations where it would be,
I agree. If it was zoned ag, Mayor Robin, would that prevent you from keeping 50% of your land in farm? If it was zoned ag, or if it was zoned industrial? If they
zone
asked for-
industrial, the ag rule doesn't apply. 50%.
Right, what I'm saying is it doesn't prevent a farmer from continuing to,
You can zone, every zoning district allows farming by right. So
I guess that's what I'm
Yeah,
getting.
there's one use that doesn't have to follow any of the rules, that's farming. So whether you have it zoned
So if
industrial,
we say that
residential,
merchant electric generating facilities have to be in an industrial
they still
zone,
farm.
you can still farm that land.
Yes, you can.
At whatever percent you decide to lease to that merchant electric generating.
We can't regulate that farming thing.
That's correct. It's just a bar that I don't think many companies are going to be willing to attempt to cross when there are other options. And maybe you all think solar's bad for our community, and that's the way to do it.
No, we don't. I think that we're willing to make that change.
I think this operation we just saw, I don't think that's good for land. I think,
Well, do you think
I don't think that land's gonna be reclaimed.
well, do you think the factories here in town are going to, good for land?
I understand, they have to be zoned industrial.
Right.
So, I'm not arguing
Well-
for industrial zone, but I am conflicted that land is probably not ever gonna be farmed. Can we agree on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I think probably it'll have solar panels on it well, if they own it, they didn't lease it. So that company will probably have solar panels on it from now on, would be and I'm guessing, I don't know.
I don't know either.
And I don't,
Those are just things that we have to, so when we're about 50 years ahead or 100 years ahead, what's our community gonna look like? And what can we do to manage that, zone that, plan that? That's our responsibility, is to plan and zone. And, or zoning and planning, or plan their zoning, and,
Jeremy, you
Yeah, that's
So
right.
in our planning realm, to be fair on the zone change, it would have to be a major changes argument every time, because the comp plan is almost a wall at this point, because we never thought about this other kind of land use that consumes acreage in our comp plan. The land use map or policy, I don't know if there's a goal or objective in that. So I don't know, at some point, we're gonna have to address your point in planning this community. If solar is now another kind of land use that comes into your community and consumes acreage, at some point, we're gonna have to get some policy directives to help you guys as you move forward on
Well,
that.
to me, it's just, you're developing your land, is what you're doing. You're not farming anymore, you're developing. I'm all for development, and I'm all for growth, and that's a different type of growth, but let's don't kid ourselves. Once it's there, it's not going away. So, and like I said, I'm leaning to probably the ag option site review.
As long as we got some teeth in the site.
And we've added teeth to the site plan review. And I think that would probably be fair to everybody. That way we still can put conditions on land where it's needed. And I think there are each tract of land is gonna be different.
Yes.
And I think it's important that we have the ability to put conditions on accordingly to the tribes based on the circumstances of that particular piece of property. Can we be in agreement on that?
Well, is that what the proposal is, or is this in addition to some?
No, that would be the site plan's
Right, sure.
approach, where you bring site plan in, and then we can put conditions on it.
I do think that under that approach, there are going to be farmers that are not going to, I think there are going to be plenty of farmers out here who would rather have 100% of their land leased to a company, to the merchant electric generator, and others are going to want to farm it.
Well, they still have the option to actually zone it. I mean, in the chart we have today, commercial electric generator is allowed in the ag zone, 3 industrial zones today. It's allowed by right in the ag zone with one rule, but you can technically zone it today. If you chose to. You don't have to, but I guess that's an option. So for the ag option, if you wanted to go more coverage, more intense, I guess you could choose to zone it on a, just voluntary basis. It's not mandated. And the chart's full of that, where we have
Mhm.
Ds and Cs and blanks.
Yeah, by selecting ag doesn't mean a person couldn't go in that owns a property and apply for the
It might be
industrial.
a good first step as we dab our toe in the water.
Stay away from zoning. Zoning just allows for winners and losers. It does. It depends on the public outcry.
Right.
I honestly think, last year we had a record year, technically, we did about 17 zone changes. Pretty confident you guys stuck to the comp plan on every one of them. Denied a couple, approved most of them, and all of them were, the findings were based on solid information based on the comprehensive plan of the future next.
But in this one, the merchant electric generator is a very unique category that's not
It's
been
not
historically,
addressed in the current.
it was never considered in the comp plan.
But there's other options to zone property at the state level, under the state law that gives you all the ability to review.
Well,
zones.
there are
That's right.
things that are done in agriculture now that I would consider industry. The state's just excluded them.
We have a handful.
Yeah.
But nothing as intense, honestly, as this, and again, I don't think any of us can go into a 5-acre tract anywhere in this county that's that covered up with that much gravel and concrete, other than a manufacturing site.
And the conditional uses, maybe that's, we say they can't.
I'm not a fan of conditional use, and I'll just tell you why, because conditional means it's conditional, it's somewhat it's a short period, where we're gonna do something like cutting hair in your house, or running a landscape business at your house, and Airbnb, and then we're supposed to go out every year and make sure they're still happening, if not, they go away. They're not permanent land uses. They run with the land, but they're conditional. The reason that's happened in other counties, that's just the model we're considering to adapt it to. Do a conditional use as a public hearing step, and it catches it at the local level, it doesn't come to you, all, it goes to the Board of Adjustments. We're putting in the site plan, which means it's coming to you. conditional use option right now, I think would be a huge mistake, because you'd be going to the state, or the Board of Adjustments, and back to the planning commission. You'd have possibly different decisions. I personally think the decision needs to stay in this board.
And use the site plan.
And use the site plan and or the zone change as an option. I don't think the CUP is where we want to go.
I mean, that's, that's a.
Thank you all. I appreciate what you do, and I'm glad I'm not having to be in your chair today.
We're not beating up on you, but we
Okay.
respect your opinion.
So I would, I've been listening to the conversation, of course, and Mr. Hunter, as our staff, are you making a recommendation? I understand, but you
Three
went
recommendations.
over here, and then you were over here, and then you were over
Like I
here.
said, there's 3 models up here. Y'all, I can come up with
Well, one of the
5
models,
more.
I don't think we're even gonna consider, right? I mean, we're not even looking at that 50 megawatt option anymore,
I
right?
think initially that was a good first attempt, and the more we talk and dive down in here, it's too complicated, it's too arbitrary.
I think it's
I think one of
unnecessary.
the other 2 options makes more sense.
Right.
So by process of elimination, we've eliminated that.
That was my recommendation.
So now we're down to two.
There's
Um,
2 instead of 3.
Are we going to close the public discussion part of this? Do we need to have anything else?
Yeah, I think it's an appropriate time to close the public discourse.
I would like to thank the chair, and I mean this sincerely, for your shepherding this discussion today. And I want to echo something that you said, Mr. Chairman, that I think people on this board have like a full tank of integrity. Every single person on this board has a full tank of integrity, and that we would be, I don't think that the industrial option is a throw it on the table to kill the project option. I think that that's an option to say, if this is what we're gonna do, let's do it and call it what it is, and if we would approve it. If it came to us with that way, I mean, I think that what you said is honest, and I wanna back that up.
I agree with Mr. Ruby.
Well, this has been a difficult decision, difficult process. We're trying to be fair to everybody. We're trying to protect our community and protect, personal rights, privacy rights, landowner rights, and our community. And like I said, this is, if and when this comes to our community, it's gonna be here for a long, long time. And, like all decisions we make, and, we had a factory over here, we do a zone change, and we had a discussion, and we would know it's coming in for a long time, so those are all things we have to put into consideration, so. Having said that, I think I agree with, I know Steve's not making any proposals, but his argument for an ag options site plan review may be, a baby step.
Again, it's going to the fiscal court ultimately, and we're just sending a recommendation to the court.
I'll let whoever wants to. I'm just looking at,
We need a motion or
we
a
need,
table.
we've got 2
I-
proposals, we eliminated one, we've got 2 in front of us. I guess we need a motion, we need a second, we need discussion, we need a vote. We may get voted down, and we go again, who knows, but.
I'll say
We-
one more thing.
We have to
and then
have a
I'll make
motion to eliminate the public hearing.
I think that the ag option actually is, I think that as written, the way that I can foresee how things move, the ag option might be more limiting to our farmers than the industrial option is. Because it would only allow them to lease half of their land to the solar company, and for those that want to lease
the same setbacks, or, I mean, the same conditions in both that the company would have to go through, I think it's better for the farmer. Am I speaking wrong, Mary Robin?
I thought, Mr. Hunter said that we could adjust the percentage perhaps through the Board of Adjustments. Is that correct? Like there is a way to.
We're speculating on a project that we don't know about, but in theory, there could be a variance on the percentage.
I think a lot has to do with the site plan review and
Set-
process.
Setbacks could be varied.
Absolutely.
Anything that's dimensional in our ordinance.
Or they could,
We're not looking at onesie-twosies here, we're looking at what we, I think that we ought to also put on the table that we know that there is a proposal for a single merchant electric generator to link all of these properties together in the eastern part of the county. And I think that really has to be what we're considering as well, not just to look at it piecemeal. I don't think it'll, well, I don't know that it's gonna win, but I would propose that make a motion, we accept the industrial option as proposed to the commission.
All right, a motion.
I want to have a little discussion so there's clarity on here when you're ready.
Let's get the motion and the second. We got a motion from Commissioner Ruby, got a second from Commissioner Davenport. Discussion.
So what you're talking about then is to have not, we were talking about agriculture. You're not, you're putting that, that's not the motion. The motion is one of the other ones, the other two categories.
The motion is this zoning ordinance change that says industrial option. Merchant electric generating facilities will be zoned or zoned industrial.
That's 50%, right?
What's that?
50%.
No, it would allow up to 100%.
I think it says 50.
No, that's not that option.
No.
No, that's,
Allow the farmer up to 100% to lease.
Yeah, in the
that's part
industrial
of it.
option, the ag paragraph is removed, and there's no parameter on development other than the setbacks.
But in industrial zoning, you can always farm. And it would allow any farmer within that zone to be able to farm as much or as little as he or she wants to.
you still have the requirements of a site plan
And
development,
you still have the requirements for site plan development.
but we would still have the categories of setback if it's in a, for the adjacent.
All the standards are the same, landscape, fire protection, setbacks, site plan.
We're doing the industrial option,
That's the
Yeah.
motion.
so that's the zone change option.
That's the zone change.
That is a zone change, yes.
That's the all merchant electric.
That's the one that says all merchant electric generating facilities will be in zone industrial.
So the big hurdle will
And-
be for the landowner to get the right group of people in here to argue for their case.
And we're going to have,
And that's it.
yeah, and the comprehensive plan does not reflect an area that, such that we might be talking about.
It's being redone too, isn't it?
But it's not today, and it's not that item.
And we have the option under a major exception, right, in the comprehensive plan to make that change.
Major economic change.
That's right. We have the ability to do that here within the comprehensive plan.
Our process in the state law, our process is someone files an application and they choose what argument, what path they're going down. We're going to argue, I'm the applicant, which I'd never be, by the way. I'll make an argument that I comply with the comprehensive plan. Or in absence of that, a developer can come in and say, look, I know y'all got a great comprehensive plan, but we need to push it over here because I want to prove to y'all under the major changes option in KRS 100 that we don't follow the comprehensive plan today and we follow this other argument. That is in the state law. And so every zone change, you all have to either comply with the comprehensive plan or in absence of, make another finding. But the developer kind of chooses the argument they're going to come in here and argue, and then you all could still say, look, I appreciate your argument, we're still going to follow our comprehensive plan.
But I'm
Which,
And-
saying that I think that everybody in this room has a full integrity meter that would be open to that and to be listened to those arguments.
And each owner of property would do that for their properties, or it could be joined, I don't know.
well, let's
It
be
sounds
clear,
like-
there could be opposition that comes in and makes the other argument that
Yes.
says, appreciate your major changes, and But we're gonna argue the comprehensive plan is the day, and that future land use map is the day. And we're gonna say that this is not appropriate because the future land use map does not show anything but agriculture, so.
Are we indicating that we didn't get enough public opinion on industrial?
No, what I'm saying in my motion is that merchant electric generating is industrial. I'm saying that merchant electric generating is industrial and that we ought to call it what it is. Merchant electric generating by state law is industrial, right?
It's referenced as industrial solar, and it defers to the local counties that have planning and zoning to take it from there.
Correct, state law can
Remove that and make that part agriculture.
Yes, this is,
state law can
No,
override.
they can actually change it, say now, this is agricultural.
They can, but they just said, today's state law said merchant electric generating is industrial, and that it gives the local planning and zoning the authority to call it what it is. And I'm proposing that we call it industrial.
and I'm stepping one other item, because right now, the state legislature is working on that to decide what the law should be around here. So we have a little bit of unknown category of things. The expectation that what they're gonna change, and what they're gonna release or approve if they do get to it, will not be opposing to what we're suggesting here. But that is still a pending item out there.
They're obviously deferring the local.
They're deferring right now to the local.
My whole point is that, my whole point is that, my whole point there is it's not voted done yet. That doesn't mean, though, that it isn't 90% plus where they're gonna go. I'm just pointing that out.
So what's your?
These are all the combination of things. I guess I'm not necessarily industrial category. The site plan is a very important portion of this, and it's no matter what on here. But the industrial is not as important to me. I think we can do it through the ag category, is what I think. That's just a statement of my personal opinion. That's why I'm asking the questions, the value of being an industrial. And that's a valid question to ask, because that's one of the key factors here.
So, we have a motion.
And I wanted to be clear what that included.
Discussion, do we have any further discussion? Commissioner Colliers, he's saying he thinks that the other option may be.
A better combination at this point in time.
So, if any more, no further, discussion, we have a vote.
On that option.
On the option that's proposed, which would be the industrial option.
And Commissioner Ruby stated this, but I just want to point out that it sounds like the findings supporting his motion to approve the industrial option are that the reality of these projects is that they're industrial, and he expressed skepticism over reclamation of land once used for these projects. And he also points out that many of the same use standards are applicable between the industrial and agricultural options. Would you adopt those findings in your motion?
Correct. I would say that this gives the farmers the most leeway with respect to what to do with their land.
I think that would be a fourth finding, flexibility for farmers.
Okay, so we have a motion for an industrial option for merchant electric facilities. All in approval, raise your hand. All, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 1, 2, 3.
Abstain.
And we have so, based on that, motion carries.
So this would be sent on then to the fiscal court to approve or not, or send back to us for further request, or?
Send a cover letter we draft a cover letter stating your recommendation and the finding. We'll send it to the fiscal court with the draft, and then the fiscal court then takes it from there. Again, they can concur with your recommendation. They could deny it. As a text amendment's a little different than a zone change. They could tweak it, they could wordsmith it, they could just reject it and say start over. Henry, take it from there. I don't know what other options they'd have. That's probably all of them.
Okay, so, moving on, new business. Any new business?
No new business.